So now I am sharing my screen, and are y'all just seeing my slides and you're not seeing my notes, are you?
Just your slides.
Oh, beautiful. Great, because while we've been kind of flat out with the, the COVID-19 stuff, I haven't had a whole lot of time to practice this presentation, but I'm going to follow along with my notes and we'll see how she goes. And so before I launch into this, I just want to say thank you to Jeff and the whole Halifax crew for inviting me to come talk to you today, and also for being so flexible in the wake of this really weird virus time. And they did a practice session with us to make sure it all worked. It's been a while since I used Zoom, but good timing, because today I had to write instructions for like the cabinet ministers on how to use Zoom. So that was fun. So yeah, learning new tools every day. So today I'm going to be talking about building a digital service in the Nova Scotia government, and where we still have a lot of things to learn in the Nova Scotia government about working in agile ways and working on multidisciplinary teams. Fortunately, now we're at a point where we actually have some success stories that I can share. And the story I'm going to tell you today is how we made it easier for vehicle dealerships in Nova Scotia to register and plate their vehicles that they buy and that they sell. So it kind of a super niche story, but had a lot of really great surprising outcomes. So the form that you see on the left was what vehicle dealers dealt with kind of before the digital service. It was entirely paper-based process. And on the right is the digital service that we created using modern internet era technology, which isn't something that we always use in government. So very exciting stuff. So before I launch into that, I'll do a little bit of an introduction of who I am, how I kind of got into this career in this weird little place in the government. So I often describe myself as a multi-hyphenate. So I'm always been a generalist throughout my career. I have a lot of trouble sticking to one sort of discipline or one sort of main area of focus. Over the past several years, I've had a lot of different job titles, including web designer, UX designer, front-end developer, business owner. My current title is service designer, but I also am doing a lot of product management these days, and also not really having much of a guidebook for product management, specifically in government. So I'm also sometimes an occasional team sticker designer. Our team presents at national and some international conferences. Always need to have a few good puns, a few good government puns to share with other people. So to give you a bit of an idea of the background of where I came from, so I studied at NASCAD, graduated in 2012. Then I went into working at advertising agencies, mainly as a graphic designer, and worked with a lot of developers, but like didn't understand what they meant when they said that I had designed something to be way too complicated to build. So in early 2014, I went to Toronto and did a front-end boot camp there. Then I went back to working for a few different digital agencies before going to work at a startup until about 2015, and really loved working in the small business community with companies at Volta that were doing lots of really exciting things. And so I eventually went out on my own, had a freelance business for 2 to 3 years around design and web development and UX design. And then in 2017, I joined the public service. So a question I often get from pretty much everyone who finds out like about my career background is like, why did you go from having your own business to working for the government? And the answer is that in 2017, I felt like the world was like so bad. And it's funny to think about now, given where we are. I was like, oh, 2017 wasn't that bad. It seems pretty good. But yeah, I felt like the work that I was doing on my own as a small business wasn't really having as much of an impact as I wanted it to. I wanted to be doing a little bit more and a little bit more challenging work. So I started looking for a job just kind of out of curiosity. And I knew that there was a lot of companies in Halifax that had really exciting missions that I'd be really happy to work for. But then I just stumbled across a job posting that said they were looking for someone with skills in UX design who could prototype in code with HTML and CSS, who could work on an agile team, and your mission was building digital government services. So I was like, okay, I'll apply for this. So I applied for the job, and then 2.5 months later, I had an interview. So the government moves super slow, newsflash to everyone. But yeah, if you apply for a job, don't expect to hear back, maybe ever, but at least 2 months. And that was fast. So I went in for an interview, didn't really think much of it, felt like it went well. I got home, and 2 hours later, I got a phone call that the job was mine and I could start whenever I wanted. So I go in for my first day of work, and I'm told that my first assignment as a service designer with the Nova Scotia Digital Service is car dealerships. And so I was like, okay, what's up with car dealerships? What do they have to do with government services? And so the problem was that when you go to buy a car and you are trading in your old car, or it's your first car, there's a ton of government paperwork that needs to be done. And often the vehicle dealership does this for you, which is kind of an extra service add-on that they do for their customers. And it's an entirely manual process. So dealers will fill out the customer paperwork, have you sign it, and it's for things like your vehicle registration, your permit, and your plates. And then sometimes there's extra things. Well, there's also like an insurance form and some extra paper documents. And then you drive away in your new car, and the dealer then drives to Access Nova Scotia, drops off the paperwork, or waits in line at Access Nova Scotia. And if they've dropped it off, they have to go back the next day and pick it up once it's been processed by a clerk. So we knew that this would be a really impactful digital service, because some really high volume vehicle dealerships like Steel and O'Regan's are going to the Access Center every day, sometimes multiple times a day, to drop off paperwork, pick up paperwork, or just wait in line. Sometimes there's different levels of urgencies for transactions that they just have to kind of wait there. So we figured it would result in around $800,000 in savings for reduced trips back and forth to Access Nova Scotia. So something that would bring a lot of value to cutting red tape for businesses, which is one of our primary missions. So there was so much paper. It was unreal. I couldn't believe it. And this was like, I had come from very digital teams in the private sector where, everything's been digital for like a long time. This was kind of like a bit of a surprise for me to be going back to this world where you have to fill in a two-sided form that is 8.5 by 14. And that is just one piece of paper. And you might also need an insurance form. Used vehicles need a different form. If your vehicle isn't safety approved, that's another form. If your vehicle's from out of the province or out of the country, you also need to include a bill of sale or other attachments. And then if you need a temporary permit, then that's another form. So it's really, really complicated, and it's also really nuanced. The staff that I talked to at Access Nova Scotia, the clerks who process these transactions, they will tell you that no two transactions are the same, especially when it comes to used vehicles and vehicles out of province. Like, stuff just gets messy, and there's tons of paperwork that needs to kind of get all in one place. So when we started this project, we started with a bit of discovery research. So myself and another service designer from my team went all over Nova Scotia and talked to the staff at dealerships, which was really interesting and like exciting, because if you are someone who works in the civil service and you go out and you want to talk to people and talk to them about their challenges in their processes and what they don't like about government, they will tell you so many things. And a lot of it is stuff that you cannot solve, but it's really interesting to hear what they say. So we went to Halifax, Dartmouth, Sackville, Enfield, Truro, New Glasgow, Bridgewater, Kentville, Church Point in like Digby area, and Weymouth. And we went to Church Point and Weymouth because they were French-speaking communities. So it was interesting to hear their process for filling out the paperwork, because when they have a customer who's French-speaking, they have to fill out an English form. So the dealer might be acting as a translator because we don't carry our forms in both French and English. So it was important to get their perspective, because this is also a service that we have to launch in French because it is something that concerns public safety. So we talked to 14 people total. So there was 10 people from various dealerships across the province and 4 people from Access Nova Scotia, people who worked as clerks or like senior customer service leaders, and then 2 people who worked at the main Service Nova Scotia office as like R&V operations support. So what we found, this is like the most exciting part of doing service design, is finding out the weird stuff that you don't think you're going to find out. So a lot of this was stuff we expected, but some of it was really interesting to hear. Dealerships mentioned that they really felt like they needed faster turnaround times, that waiting 24 hours and dropping off paperwork and going back to pick it up was a big hassle for them, which was, you know, kind of a no-brainer. We weren't not expecting to hear that. Another thing that they mentioned was that the form was way too long and complicated for new dealers to learn, which is absolutely true. If you are just starting at a dealership and you're kind of learning the ropes, that form is really intimidating and can be really complicated. And they also wanted a way to automate simple errors. So an example of this would be, say you are buying a vehicle, you fill out all of the paperwork, your dealer drops it off at the Access Nova Scotia, but you forgot that you have a speeding ticket that you haven't paid for. Super common. So the clerk at Access Nova Scotia, they type in your driver's license number, a flag comes up in R&V that says, hey, this person has an outstanding fine. They're not allowed to permit a vehicle right now. So the Access Center clerk writes on a Post-it note that, hey, Gabrielle White is not allowed to plate the vehicle. She has to call the Access Center. So they can't write why. It could be because my license been suspended. It could be because I have a speeding ticket. It could be like any number of reasons, but for privacy concerns, they're not allowed to share it. So that paperwork gets sent back to the dealership. The dealer then calls me, I answer the phone, say, hey, what's going on? And they say, well, you have to go to Access Nova Scotia before I can complete your paperwork. So I go to Access Nova Scotia, pay my fine, call my dealer back, tell them that it's settled. Then the dealer goes back to Access Nova Scotia and resubmits my paperwork. So something that could be resolved with a really simple system check of a dealer being able to type in my master number or my driver's license number to an online service and have something that comes up in red that says, hey, this person is not eligible to plate. That would take out a lot of the effort. So when we talked to Access Nova Scotia staff, it was really interesting because they had they could butt heads in terms of what their problems were. Whereas the dealer said they found the paperwork was too hard, Access Nova Scotia staff said that dealers weren't doing their paperwork correctly and they weren't taking the time to learn. So it was an interesting point of conflict there. And the Access Nova Scotia staff also said that they found that their environment was really busy and really distracting, and that they really need a streamlined process that is kind of like totally distraction free. When we interviewed Access Nova Scotia staff, I talked to a senior customer service rep in a back office area. And during our 1-hour interview, she was interrupted 3 to 5 times with different things. It is a totally chaotic environment in the Access Center. And the clerks that are doing your paperwork are making kind of like mission critical decisions. Like they're the ones deciding whether or not you should have a car on the road or not. And it's really important that they have the environment to do their work correctly. So once we finished our discovery period, we moved into drafting our user stories that then formulated for our minimum viable service that we started to prototype. So we brought together a tech team of internal government people and some external consultants to help us start the service prototyping and actually start building the service. So this was around May of 2018. So our first prototype was super ugly. As a designer, this makes me cringe super hard, but it was built in balsamic mockups so that our stakeholders wouldn't get distracted by the details. If you show a really shiny mockup to a senior government person, they are like, I want that, when can I have it? This is perfect. And it like puts unnecessary pressure on you to deliver exactly the thing that is supposed to be more of a test prototype. So we often start with like kind of the like shitty first draft, like a very ugly version to start with. And we show that to our stakeholders and we test that with users. So this was really working in a new way for government. We adapted a little bit of our own agile workflow for this. So we started working in 2-week sprints, doing daily stand-ups with the core team, and implemented regular sprint demos, except we couldn't call them sprint demos because nobody knew what that meant. So we just call them show and tells where I work, which is like kindergarten fun, but it actually really helps communicate the idea. So this was really familiar to me working in this way. And so I was really, really comfortable doing this. And every step along the way, I kept coming up against all this resistance from like senior folks who are more invested in the policy side and in the program kind of area, being like really uncomfortable with this way of working. But I just dragged everybody along and it all worked out in the end. But it was really interesting, especially during those show and tells that we did every 2 weeks. So I was basically the spokesperson for these show and tells. And every 2 weeks, we brought together all of our stakeholders and senior leadership to show what we had worked on and show them actual working code or a working prototype of the service, which is something that hadn't been done in government really before. Typically, big technology projects are contracted out to an external firm, you know, worked on kind of in like a black box type of situation, and then delivered with a big bang 3 years later or 2 years later after, you know, exceeding scope, exceeding costs. We were working in a way where we were showing the ugly bits and showing by doing. And it was really interesting, but also really tense at times. So we brought together developers, enterprise architects, policymakers, operations, privacy team, communications, and senior leadership to see what we were working on so that people could pose questions before we got way too far down a path that we shouldn't be going down. For example, I think of our privacy team. They are rock stars and they have a really hard job because I was just like, why can't we make it so that you type in someone's master number and all their information pre-populates? And they were like, no way, you cannot do that. That's not allowed. And it's really interesting to see like what actual legislative traps you come up against, and where I've actually thought something was a really good idea, but was basically breaking the law. So a lot of these show and tell meetings turned into a bit of a debate, which was really good, but also something that's uncommon around a government table. A lot of people are really conflict avoidant in that sort of organization. So it was our way of making sure that everyone was included and that we were being inclusive in terms of our design process. So as the voice of the user, as a service designer, I often came up against these like policy challenges that I thought were kind of bogus or like needed to change. And then I would challenge these and people would be like, we could change that, but it would literally take 2 years because it's in the legislation. So figuring out ways to kind of work within the constraints of what's the law and then what's something that is a more modern way of doing something is challenging but really interesting. And you'll see that when I do like a short demo of the service, you'll see that there's some areas where it's like, what? Why do you have to get a signature digitally? It's because it's in the legislation. So each show and tell was really an opportunity to bring people who didn't feel like they were involved that much in the service design to actually get them to feel like they were involved and that they had a say and that they could provide feedback as we go along. And in that way, it was really meaningful to bring together all these people, especially people who you don't really get to see the operational side of how their policy works. And there's people who work in offices that draft policy that never really see what happens when that policy is implemented and how it impacts the users who have to comply with this policy. And it's important that they get to see what that actually means in real life. So we really focus on usability testing on our team. It's something that is, I would say it's like a core value of the Nova Scotia Digital Service as a way of showing by doing and showing the value of getting real user feedback in real time on what you've designed. So we did 2 rounds of usability testing, one during the prototyping phase where we tested with just a clickable PDF of that super ugly balsamic mockup. And we brought in 10 dealers from around the province to our office to do a usability test in person that we had them do one-on-one with a facilitator, and then we live streamed in a boardroom to all of our stakeholders so that they could see sort of what was actually happening in the room, which is always really, really valuable because, again, people who focus on policy, people who are non-technical, seeing these usability tests really helps shift something in their mind about user experience and understanding that, okay, regular citizens don't talk the same way as government people. So after we run usability testing, we always do a 2 to 3 hour sense making session where we review and group our team observations, and then we sort everything into our product backlog so that we can then figure out what our next priorities are and then continue to test again. So it is a really iterative approach that we've only adapted in the last like 2 to 3 years. And as we've kind of grown our capacity as an agile team, it's really been interesting to have usability testing kind of as our focal point and then building the rest of our process around that. So because we're at a dev meetup, of course, I need to talk a little bit about what it's built on. I am more of a front-end developer. No, I'm only a front-end developer, actually. I can't say more of. I don't know how to do any back-end stuff. So it's built on React with the front end. It's integrated with our RMV service, which is like 20 years old and like an ancient legacy system. So that's why it's often so hard to build government services, is because you can build a super modern front end, but then it has to plug into like an ancient thing. And so we're trying to move away from that world, but that involves like in a major amount of investment in decommissioning like some really, really old systems. So integrating with RMV is done in Java, and that was probably what took so long. We launched the service in about a year, and that's probably why it took so long. We've also integrated with the Nova Scotia login service, which is a login platform that helps businesses kind of be able to keep all of their information in one place. Then there's integration with also the Nova Scotia address lookup system. It's a really cool service that is like the unsung hero in government that has like a database of all of the valid civic addresses in Nova Scotia. So whenever you have to type in an address, it auto-populates with everything, and it's really kept up to date really well and really well managed. And another major integration that we used was the POKE database, which is like, it's like an international open API, I think, for vehicle information. So if you type in a vehicle VIN number, it will pull back data about that vehicle. So that's really helpful for us because this is a service for dealerships. So primary thing that they're doing is entering VIN numbers and pulling back data. So I'm seeing a couple questions, and if I had to do anything differently, what would I do? Oh, I'm going to think about while I'm talking, but come back to that later.
There was also one other question asking who did your illustrations.
Oh, that was me. So funny story. How do I make this? Okay, I know how to make it go away. So I did these illustrations for a job interview that I didn't get. I applied for a product manager position at my own work and they didn't give it to me. But yeah, I used all these illustrations to present like the different projects that I had worked on. Yeah. So yeah, last thing about the development, it's built on OpenShift, which was the first time we've used an OpenShift environment and like a containerized environment for one of our services. And it's how we're moving to do everything now because it makes continuous improvement, and our DevOps team very, very happy, and we love it. And they're the best people to work with in the Nova Scotia Digital Service. They're amazing. So once we kind of got into the development phase, I moved into a little bit more of a QA/change management / service support model role, where I really had to focus on doing a lot of staff training because this service impacted so many people in the government. And we really had to cover our bases and make sure that everyone was informed about the upcoming changes, because for Access Nova Scotia clerks, this really changed how they did their job in a lot of ways. And we needed to make sure that they were aware and they had training on what they needed to do differently. So that included doing training sessions for the RMV contact center staff, the tech support contact worker, the tech support contact center staff, Access Nova Scotia staff who are processing transactions. And then we also had to do a lot of informational sessions with people like the Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal Vehicle Compliance team. This service actually changed the way we deliver temporary permits. If you've ever had a temporary permit on your car, you know that on the front, there's like the expiry date that's handwritten, and then on the back, there's like a bajillion fields that you need to fill out by hand. So online dealer service now gets rid of the need to actually fill in the back by hand. You just print out a piece of paper, keep it in your glove box, cross out the thing on the back of the yellow sheet, and still write the date on the temporary permit. But this is also where I got to use my voice actor skills, because everyone was like, we need a training video for this. Who can we hire to do a training video? And I was like, we're not hiring someone to do a training video. I'll do it. So what I'll do, I have 3 minutes left, which is about perfect time so that I can this video. So I'm unplugging my headphones so that it will actually play. Here's how you can title a vehicle and then transfer a plate. Oh no, there we go. Here's how you can title a vehicle and then transfer a plate. So we want to start by creating a new transaction and then selecting our transaction type. Then choose new or used vehicle sale and enter your vehicle identification number. Then we want to get the buyer's master number. And now choose to plate and permit the vehicle. In this case, the plate owner will be the same as the vehicle owner. And we can choose our plating option. So here we're transferring a plate. Now enter the plate number that you want to transfer and continue. Select that you have insurance. And then select that you have a valid MVI. Now enter the customer information, including first name, last name, and their birth date. And enter their address. Some suggestions will populate for you as you start typing. Now review the vehicle information. Some of this data may be pre-populated for you, so make sure you review everything and make sure it's okay. Now enter the customer's insurance information. We need the insurance company, the policy number, the effective date of the insurance, and the expiry date. Ask your customer how they want to receive their official documents. Then ask them to sign using a mouse or a touchpad to confirm their application.
So this is hilarious because we did not have the signature thing worked out when I had to do these videos, so bad.
Your customer will need to review this screen to make sure that everything is true and correct. If they see any mistakes, you can go back and edit right from this screen. Because your customer transferred an existing plate, a new document will be generated that must be kept in the customer's vehicle until their official documents arrive from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. At this point, you can save the transaction for someone else at your dealership to review or continue to add attachments.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause it there because the rest is just kind of boring stuff.
That's in general how it kind of works, and I realize I'm starting to go over my time, so I'll get through. I think I only have a couple last slides, but I just want to talk quickly about going live. So when we went live, it was in April of last year. We had no big media blitz. We made no announcements that this was coming. Week one, we onboarded one dealership who had kind of been with us from the start, and they had been part of our discovery research and our usability testing. Week two, we brought on 5 more dealerships that were also in the same boat, people who had been with us from the beginning. And then myself and our sustaining product manager, who has gone on to continue to manage the service while I've moved on to some other products. We shared a burner phone for, I think, a month, that we took calls directly from dealers so that we could know exactly what was going on with the service, exactly where the problems were happening. And this is so that we didn't have to go through our regular support model of having people call the contact center, have the contact center escalate it, have the tier 2 support escalate it to us. This kind of was a nice little hypercare feature that we were really lucky to do. And we're still collecting constant feedback from dealers about what they'd like to see in the service. And our paper service hasn't gone away, which is another important thing to mention. So it's just an additional channel and really helpful at this time where I don't know how many people are buying cars these days or what type of paperwork dealers need to do, but they can do it online. So since April, we've done 4 releases, which is not as many as we'd like to do, but we're still working on making our team more agile and, not having to pay consultants for this work. Our latest release was actually today, which was exciting. And our support team continues to be really involved in the process of development and engaging with our community, which is amazing. So really exciting to be continuing on this journey. We're still working things out, figuring things out, how we work best, trying to build capacity on our team, but we are certainly getting there. So that is all that I had to share today. So thank you for listening, and I am on Twitter at Gab White, and I also linked down below to our Nova Scotia Digital Service blog, where we also are talking about the services that we're building now, including the 811 checker that the Premier is always talking about for everyone to be using. So Yeah, that is all for me.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you
We
guys.
do have two outstanding questions that
Yes,
I'll hit you with.
sure.
Technically three. So let's start out with the one you deferred. If you had to do the DMV project over again, what would you do differently? Is there something that you can pick out?
Okay, first of all, it's RMV. DMV is an American term. Um, but I think I would have made the service even more minimum viable. Um, we had like a really tight timeline for government, and we missed it by like 4 months. Like we were supposed to deliver the service in like 9 months, and we missed it because I think there was too much scope. Like there's a lot of cool features in this where we actually have some features for like power users. So if you think of like some of the larger dealerships like Steel Chev, I'll give the example of, they're on Portland Street, but they like buy like fleets of vehicles for like rental car companies. So we have like an alternative flow where instead of registering one vehicle, you can register like dozens at once if they're all going to one buyer. And I think that was just like some additional scope that maybe we should have rethought for like a second release. But I think our first release was too big. Mm-hmm.
Great. Next up from Anonymous, scary. How many concurrent users do you have to handle?
Hard to say. So since we launched, we've had about, last time I checked, which was like back in like the fall when I was given an update, I think we're still under 100 users. There's 1,300 dealerships in the province. Around I think around 300 of them are new vehicles. Most of them are used vehicles that kind of pop up on Sackville Drive. But yeah, like, most of our uptake has been from like the really large dealerships who do like huge volumes of transactions. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's hard to say. Like there's a lot of dealerships, but there's a lot that don't do a whole lot. Yeah.
Next up from Chris Adams is, do you think these process enhancements will pave the way for other NS forms, such as residential fishing license, to be almost or fully digitized?
Yeah, that's really our biggest goal right now, is building the capacity within our team that we can establish kind of a consistent basis for all of our forms. We are certainly getting there. Yeah, if you're looking at what we're doing, like literally right now with the check if you need to call 811 service, that service was launched in 48 hours, which we wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't built services like the online dealer service and a few other ones where we started to create, we don't really have a design system to work from. We have like a bit of a generic pattern library, but there's still like a lot of missing consistencies. And we ask for a lot of information from people that we already have. So like online dealer services, we're asking people to give us all this personal information, but we already have it. So finding out ways to, ask people once instead of asking them multiple times is something that we're working towards as well. So working towards having like a Nova Scotia identity is another thing we're trying to work on too, so that you can renew your vehicle permit and we already know where you live. You don't have to give us your address again, that kind of thing.
Great. We've got about 2 minutes left before we go into break. Last question from the Q&A. Do you have any advice for encouraging decision makers to listen to usability testing feedback rather than their own opinions or experiences?
Yeah, that is a great question. And, the thing that I have found is that usability testing can often be like a really humbling experience as a designer, because I will design something and be like, this makes sense. And the policymaker will be like, no, it won't. They won't get it. And sometimes I'm right, and sometimes the policymaker is right. And I think that it's more about the culture at your organization. Like if someone can't see, after seeing like 6 people fail to get through the same screen, like if they can't see why something's not working, That's like a bit of a bigger problem in terms of just your organization, like not having the humility to be like, I was wrong. So yeah, I don't think that really answers the question, but I think like really encouraging people to attend sessions and like also participate in like, the planning and drafting the user scenarios and getting them to understand why you're testing what you're testing is also really important.
And really quickly, last, alpha, beta, live, lobster. What makes something lobster?
Okay, so it like I don't know, like this comes up all the time and I'm like, I've created a monster. So it was literally one of my colleagues was going to an international design and government conference in London, and she was like, I want to bring some stickers. What is a good punny thing? And I was like, design with porpoise. And then I was like, also alpha, beta, live. And then it was like live lobster, because that's like a Nova Scotia thing is, live lobsters in the lobster tank. So we often joke about how when we launch a service, we are releasing it from the tank and back into the wild, but still carrying and feeding it. I don't know, the metaphor doesn't really stretch because it started out as a joke and now it has to have meaning.
It's funny. So we are going to go into a break. There's one last question. I'll ask that, Gabe, if you mind sticking for a minute through break.
Oh, I totally can.
So we'll reconvene at 8 o'clock sharp. I'll give a 2-minute warning before that happens. Each of our speakers today, Dash Hudson, has kindly offered to make a $50 donation to Canada Learning Code on behalf of each of them.
So nice. I love Canada
I
Learning
know,
Code.
Gabe, you've had a personal connection with that organization, and they do a lot to help grassroots learning. And so thank you to Dash Hudson for doing that for our speakers.
Yes.
So feel free to take a break. We're going to transition to the last question, and then we'll kind of put up the slides while we wait, and we'll come back for Alana's talk at 8 sharp. Final question was, any cultural, people, process hurdles during the project that stand out, and how did you overcome?
Yeah, I had a big one around temporary permits. I did like a lot of research on like how to modernize temporary permits, and a lot of jurisdictions are doing like a printout from your computer, like automatically generates the number for you. Whereas our province still, you buy like a book of temporary permits and there's like carbon paper that you have to like keep one copy for yourself, one for the customer, one for Access Nova Scotia. It's a huge racket and it's like so outdated. And so like I made it my personal mission to like change these temporary permits. But I was only like, I ended up making a compromise where it's now like you just fill out the front and you can print out a document that serves as the back that you just need to carry with you. But I really wanted, and we totally had the capacity to build a totally digital temporary permit system. But it was like, yeah, we came into too much conflict with potential legislation, and also having to work with other jurisdictions to like, you have to inform like all the other provinces that this is what we're doing now. You have to like inform the RCMP, like you have to get like all these levels of approvals that would have really slowed us down. And so I had to let that one go. But that was like the biggest one I can think of.
Great. Well, thank you very much for speaking this evening, Gabe. And we'll break and be back in about 7 minutes.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for letting me ramble. I love talking about work.
Awesome. Thanks again.